was Dune by Frank Herbert. After I watched the movie, I was inspired to read the book, and I'm very happy I did because it's different but very interesting, and after reading it, it's become one of my favorite sci-fi books I've ever read. So Dune is very complicated. It has a lot of intertwined stories and a very complicated plot structure, so I will try my best to summarize it, but it is extremely complicated. But Dune is a sci-fi novel set in a distant future where noble families control planets and this really valuable resource called spice. And the story follows Paul Atreides as his family gains control of the desert planet Arrakis, which is the only source of the spice. The Harkonnens and the evil empire plot against Paul and his family, meaning that he has to navigate political issues, tribal conflicts, his own destiny, and a lot of other issues as he becomes leader among the Fremen, or the people of the desert planet Arrakis, while also uncovering the secrets of the planet and the powers of spice. So the book is full of quotes that I love, but my two favorites are the Bene Gesserit mantra and Duncan Idaho's advice to Paul. So the Bene Gesserit mantra repeats itself a lot in the book. It's very common for Jessica, who is Paul's mom, or even Paul himself to say, because it's the little mantra that they keep in their head whenever they're facing a tough situation. And the reason why I think it's very important is just because not only does it sound really cool, but it carries Paul throughout a lot of the story. And whenever it comes back up in the novel, you know that something is about to go down. So that's why I really like to see this quote. And also, of course, it sounds cool. And Duncan Idaho's advice, Duncan Idaho is one of Paul's mentors and friends. And when he told Paul this, it was right before he left for Arrakis, and it kind of stays in Paul's head the entire time. And it's just a really beautiful quote, and it's just very interesting, and it's one of my favorites from the book. So for all of the technical things about the book, like the structure and the literary devices and like that, the book is very dialogue heavy. You can hear everyone's thoughts the entire time as Frank Herbert writes out everyone's thoughts, and they're thinking a lot, and they don't act as often as they do think. Also, there's a lot of plans inside of plans within the plot. So much of the novel is just people planning things, people waiting, people talking about what they're going to do. So that's a huge part of the book. For literary devices, it's in a third-person point of view the entire time, and the narrator can hear everyone's thoughts, so you're getting a lot of that. There's a lot of historical allusions, because even though it takes place in a sci-fi world, it's almost as if it's taking place in the past, because there's a lot of medieval allusions, a lot of ancient Roman, ancient Greek, stuff like that gets brought up very often. So there's a lot of historical allusions. Also, it's very exposition heavy, as it's a very complicated and new world. So the first, I want to say 50 pages, there's a lot of explaining, a lot of setup, a lot of foreshadowing for the end. The main themes are religion, corruption, and ecology. They're brought up very often, and they're pretty much the main themes of the entire novel. And some of the most important symbols are water, because it takes place on a desert planet, so water is very important. Knives are also very symbolic, because the type of knife that the people have determines if they're good or bad very often. And spice, which is the main driving force, is also very important. So the book and movie are pretty similar, but there are some differences. Mainly, the book is more thoughts than actions, and the movie is more actions than thoughts. In the book, there's not as much fights. There's not as many wars. It's not as action-packed as the book is. The book is a lot more thinking, a lot more planning, and there's also more characters, more important characters in the book. The movie is more entertaining, but it's also more action. So my favorite character from the novel is named Stilgar. He is the leader of the Fremen, and his story is really tragic because he was a strong, independent leader who was very powerful in his Fremen stronghold. But then when Paul comes, he believes that Paul is their savior, and he almost loses his mind and he becomes a mindless follower so quickly, and he loses all of his agency. And his story is very interesting because it's a cautionary tale about how radical religion can make people and how they can possibly lose all of their independence if they throw all of their hope and project all of their hope and faith onto one person. So his story is very interesting and very tragic, which is why he's one of my favorite characters. So my opinion on the book is that I really loved it. After watching the movie, I was very intrigued to watch. I knew that it was going to be pretty long and pretty boring, but when watching it, I was really impressed because all of the interconnected stories were very interesting to watch, and hearing all the characters' thoughts, and also the way it was written very well. So it was a very interesting and a very enjoyable read.